The statues of Robin Hood's Outlaws at the base of Nottingham Castle Rock, where the wooden walls of the original castle once stood. Amongst them, a figure no one today recognises. It is Will Stutely, and he is included here because, according to legend, this is where Robin rescued Stutely from the gallows. It's possible, but this video will take you to two places in Nottingham where gruesome public executions really did take place. Firstly, to High Pavement. In Saxon times, this was the centre of town, with the hugely successful weekday cross market and a fort where now stands Nottingham Contemporary Art Gallery. Archaeologists believe that carved out caves and dungeons beneath these streets show evidence of prisons and punishment right back to Saxon times, and Shire Hall, now known as the Galleries of Justice, stands where similar official buildings have stood since 600 AD. After the Norman conquest, the appointed Sheriff of Nottingham's duties were based here. He was required to collect taxes and keep the peace, and so this place, then known as Sheriff's Hall, was always more connected with law and order than the castle itself. Criminals were hung here in public between 1738 and 1861, usually on the day after their conviction. Gallows Day, now known as Gala Day, was often declared a public holiday, and persons owning a room above these streets would hire them out to those thirsting for a better view of the grisly entertainment involved. Across the street from Shire Hall stands St Mary's, the church where Robin Hood is said to have been arrested by the Sheriff of Nottingham in a much earlier building after breaking his sword in a duel. During the 15th and 16th centuries, prisoners condemned to hang were given their last rites at St Mary's, before mounting the hangman's cart and embarking on a final journey to another place of execution on the north side of town, Gallows Hill. The bottom of Mansfield Road, the north road leading out of the city. If the prisoner was of Jewish descent, his cart would now turn left down Shakespeare Street, where the Jews were allotted a gallows of their own. It seems even on the end of a noose, Jews and Gentiles were not allowed the same dubious privilege. Halfway up the hill, as the gallows came into view, and sometimes with a small choir and doubtless many spectators taking up the rear, the hangman's cart would stop outside the Nag's Head Inn, and the prisoner would be offered one last drink, a pint of Nottingham ale. On one infamous occasion, the prisoner rejected his ale and asked to press on ahead and get it over with, but no sooner was his dead body hanging from the rope than a full pardon arrived, all too late. Gallows Hill is the junction of Forest Road East and Mansfield Road. The earliest surviving mention of these gallows dates back to 1496, but centuries before that, travellers entering this northern gate to the town would have witnessed bodies rotting and swaying here in the breeze, and therefore be deterred themselves from any law breaking. The original public gallows stood where St Andrew's Church now stands, high on a sandstone ridge so typical of Nottingham's landscape. Some sources say when the church foundations were laid in 1869, the gallows were moved to the other side of the road. Others say a permanent gallows had already been erected on the opposite side of the road in the mid-16th century. I prefer the earlier date. Who would build a church on the exact spot where criminals had so recently hung? This cemetery keeper's lodge marks the spot where these gallows once stood. The last execution to be held here was of 45-year-old William Wells for highway robbery in April of 1827. Thereafter, Gallows Hill had its name changed to appease local residents, but a name change could never exorcise the ghost sightings which persist to this day. The cemetery was built on the site of a former sand mine. On the north side of the cemetery is the dip known as St Anne's Valley, originally intended as the resting place for Nottingham's more wealthy residents. But when that proved unpopular, the site was ultimately used for paupers' graves. In Robin Hood's day, the area at the base of this sandy hill, now known as the Forest Recreation Ground and home to the annual Goose Fair, would have been the start of the once mighty Sherwood Forest.